to another in our series of learning Microsoft Access. What I'd like to talk about in today's video is how to import and export data from and into Microsoft Access. So what I'd like to do today is start with a blank database. And being a blank database, I'm going to go to this external tab here. And the external tab here, of course, shows the icons for exporting data. And notice they're grayed out right now because there are no objects to export at this point. The minute we have an object or a table over here, this will light up and allow us to do the various different items over there. So we need to start on the import side and get some data into our system. So when we click on import data, what I'd like to do is start talking about importing from another file. Let's start with Microsoft Excel. And Microsoft Excel, I have this examples folder up here where I have a few different types of files that I can demonstrate the process of importing the data. So I'm going to browse here for the Excel spreadsheet that I have called EmpList at this point. I'm going to open it. Then I have two different options down here. I can import the source or I can link to it. So that anytime somebody changes the spreadsheet, I automatically get an update in Excel, in Access. We're going to talk about linking in the next video. So let's go look at the import. So when I click OK here, it reads the spreadsheet. It notes that I have several different sheets, but sheet 1 is the one that I am interested in. And you notice it has a list of the data, and it looks like on the first line they have field names or column names. That'll become useful in the next dialog box after I click next. So this looks good to me at this point. I'm going to click next here. It automatically recognized that these things might be column headings, that it automatically checks it for me. If those weren't really field names or column names, then I would have been able to uncheck this and leave those as data. And then in the next screen, I would have been able to choose field names. So I'm going to click next here and notice that the field names could be modified here. So even though the spreadsheet has first name in camel case, I could put first name and put a space in between them and take last name and put a space in between them. You notice that in these first two that it chose short text. It shows them not to be indexed, but I think I want to index the last names. And I'm going to say, yes, I'm going to index it, but duplicates are okay because I might have several people with the same name in my employee list. And then if there were fields in here that I didn't want to have in my database, I could then skip a particular field. And there have been occasions when I have skipped fields that were just superfluous for my needs in the database, but the person giving me the data or the data that I'd created on a spreadsheet had to have that field for some other reason. So I'm going to go ahead and click Next. And the question of primary keys comes next. We know in good database design we should always have a primary key. Sometimes the primary key is already in your spreadsheet. In this case, it's not. So I'm going to go ahead and say let Access add a primary key here. And so now I have an ID field, a first name, last name, and then the age field. And so when I click next, it asks me what to name the table. What it does is it pulls the name of the spreadsheet as the name of the table, the spreadsheet tab in particular. EmpList was the name of the spreadsheet. The tab was sheet 1. So I'm going to go table employee list. Okay. And I'm going to click finish. Now I have the option to save the import steps. Notice there's a saved imports button up here that I can refer back to any saved import that I have. So I'm going to go ahead and put this in my saved list so that it appears under that button there. So check marking there gives me a suggested name, and notice it puts the word import and then the word EmpList, which was the name of the spreadsheet. So while the name of the table became the name in the tab, the name of the import became the name of the spreadsheet. And I happen to like it that way. I usually leave these the way that Access suggests it. And then I click Save Import. And now we have an employee list that we've pulled in, and it's the same data as was in the spreadsheet. So let's close that and move on to the next data source here. And the next data source is an HTML document. Now, I have an HTML document out there that has just a single table in it. And that single table, I'm going to browse for the HTML file here. I'm going to click on it, click open, and I have three different options here. I could import into a new table. I could append it to a table that I already have, and then I could choose that table here. Now, note that if you use the append a copy of the records into a table, what happens is you have to make sure that the table has the same field names, field structure as the data you're appending into. And we'll show you that example here coming up shortly. Linking is going to be done in the next video, so we'll get back to this this exercise in the next video. So when I click OK, gives me a look at the data. Notice this time the first row contains column headings is not checked, and for good reason. It looks like down here I don't have a column heading. So let's go ahead and click next, because here I would have to then choose my field names, and it looks like this one is an ID field, and this one is first name, this one is last name, and this one appears to be maybe a hire date, and I'm not really sure. Maybe that's an employee number. So I'll go ahead and give them those columns. And then when I click next, oh, notice the data type is selected here. Emp number has long integer, which would be appropriate. None of these fields are indexed, so I'm going to go ahead and go back over to here. Remember, I indexed the last name of this employee list table. And so it looks like everything is good. I'm going to click next. Now, if I let Access add a primary key here, it looks like it's going to duplicate data that's already in the spreadsheet. So I'm going to instead choose my own primary key, and it'll be that ID field that's over here on the left. And then I can click next, and it's picked up the name of the table in the HTML document, and I'm going to leave it at table employees and go ahead and click finish. And I can save the import steps again. Click save import. And here in my saved imports now, I've saved two different lists. And notice it still has the icon showing that this is an HTML file and this was an Excel file. Okay, so I close that. Well, let's look at the next one. What's really crazy about this system is it even recognizes XML files. So XML files can be pretty interesting as a data transfer medium where it transfers both data and metadata. And so I'll browse for an XML file. And so this department's complete file is what I want to do for my XML file. Notice it also has a schema file here, and they tend to come in pairs that way. And so when I open it here, it doesn't give me any options to do it into an existing table or anything like that that you'd expect to see here. And it gives you some cautions and things that it won't import. But when I click not browse, click OK here to go to the next, notice that it has the structure that you'd expect. Under tables, it's table department. Now, if there were two different tables in this XML file, it would actually list multiple tables, and you could actually import more than one. So I want to import the structure and the data, which means I'll import the department numbers and the descriptions that are listed. And when I click OK, I can save the import steps as usual and save import. And now let's look at those departments. And here we have the department numbers and the marketing and department descriptions. Now, if we were to look at that HTML file, if we were to go ahead and look at that HTML file here, we would be able to see that here it has table departments, and in the definition of table departments, it has a department number and description for each one of the rows. Okay, and it of course is the same data that we would expect. If we compare the two bits of data here, we have the same information in both. All right, so we can close that. Let's close this one up. And moving right along, we have the next one, which are text files. Now, I find that text files tend to be the most prevalent type of data source that I import. One in particular is the CSV file that is readable by Excel. A lot of times people, when they're sending me data, will export or save their data in a CSV file, a comma separated values file. And so that tends to be the kind of file I get. In this case, we've just got two different types of files. Both of them are listed as .txt, so they're listed as text documents. This delimited one here, there's two types really. There's delimited by a character, and the character can be anything really, and I'll show you how that's flexible like that. Or you can import a fixed file which has fixed widths, the first character of every field starting in the same place. So let's look at the delimited one in this case, and we can then have the same three here. We can import it new table, import it existing table, and import and make it just a linked table if we want. And so when we click OK here, this is the way it looks, delimited or fixed width. If we look at the data, we see a comma here as a delimiter. And with the comma there, I'm going to go ahead and just assume that we're going to have a delimited file. And when I click next here and tell it that it's a comma that's delimiting, it puts the fields in rows. Hey, it looks like I'm good to go. The first row does not contain file names. In other words, this is the duplicate of this table employees, it looks like. And then we'll go to the next one. By the way, if I were to skip back here, notice there's no text qualifier around these. Text qualifiers are like the quotation mark around the actual field that would be surrounding each of the commas. Now that's particularly important, especially if this Devalo comma Nancy was meant to be Devalo comma Nancy for in only one field. This is particularly important when somebody sends me a CSV file and they've got commas in the data. So a CSV file is a comma separated values, but hopefully what they did when they sent me the data is they sent it to me with text qualifiers around the full field so that I knew that even though there's a comma in between those quotation marks, that the quotation marks tell me put all that in one field. I've had some really funky looking imports when they haven't done that properly for me. So a text qualifier here, you click the down arrow, there's a double quotation mark, single quotation mark, or none here. So hopefully if it's important, they gave you a text qualifier. So when I click next here, I can choose the names of the fields again, and we got first name, and we've got last name, and we have hire date, and this field is employee number, and we click next, and we can, if we don't want to let access, provide the primary key here. So we're just going to leave it at ID there, and click next. And so we're going to import the delimited file. Save the import steps. Save the import. Very good. Now what I want to do is something that's a little bit interesting. Remember, I told you that this table employees list was the same as that other data. So I'm going to close this. And we're going to go to this next source, which is this text file. And this text file, when I browse to it, is going to be this fixed data set. And when I click OK here, it just shows this way, and it automatically selects fixed width, figuring that that's probably good. Okay. And then we click next. Now, the fixed width allows me to change where the dividing line for each of those fields is. Now, sometimes these lines aren't quite lined up properly, or these don't have the space in odd places. And sometimes you'll see these lines here in the middle, and you have to adjust these lines to tell where the fixed location is for each field, depending on how good your data is. And so when I click next here, I've got field 1 being a long integer. Okay, so what I'm going to do this time is go ahead and give these fields names. We've got ID here, and we've got first name. This is probably getting to be old news to you by now. We're going to go ahead and name all these fields. If we click next, We choose the primary key as being the ID field, and we click next again. We import fixed, and away we go. And we've imported our next text file. Now I've started to accelerate in going through these next ones rather quickly, just to illustrate that all of these file types can be imported fairly easy. Not only that, you can import from all these different types of databases. So you can import from another Microsoft Access database. So in browsing for those, I don't have one in my examples file. You can import from pretty much any Access database that you want. And not only can you import tables, but you can import forms and VBA code and macros and any object that's in Microsoft Access, you can import into your database. So if I was to go ahead and browse for a database that I know is on my system here, if I open up that Chapter 5 class there, and we go OK there, you can see that it brings up quite a different dialog box. Here's all the tables that were in that database. And so I can click on one or many. I don't believe this one had very many other objects, but it's got a couple forms, no reports modules. So it has a couple forms and a couple tables, and I could choose some or all of those forms and tables. And I can click OK. And what happens if in this case, I'm not going to save the import steps because I don't necessarily need the import steps. I don't need to redo this. I'm pulling in the objects. And voila, you see all of those tables here. You see the two forms here. And I could actually open the products data sheet here and look at all the products and see how it was built and examine it and use those objects and data tables as well. All right, so if you have other data sources, for these things you have to have the ODBC connection all set up for them. And I don't have ODBC connections set up for any of those right now, but it's pretty much once you have the ODBC connection, it's the same as importing an Access database. It'll ask you the same type of object questions and whether you want data and the object or just the structure, that type of things. You've got online services, you got SharePoints and data services that you can link to, and then you've got other ODBC databases. And oddly enough, it'll even import your Outlook folder, i.e. it could import your contact list, for example. It could import several different objects from your Outlook folder, such as emails and such, and put them all in your database. Okay. So that takes you through a pretty good tour of the imports. Now let's look at the exports. So let's say that I want to go ahead and export this documents folder. I can export in all these different formats, okay? So let's say I want to send these departments off to Excel. I would browse where I want to send it, okay, and give it a file name. So let's go ahead and send it to my examples folder on my desktop again. And if I save that location, notice it's going to create a table departments Excel, and it's going to be in my examples folder, and export data with formatting and layout. I would not do that unless you felt the strong need that you had formatting in this table that you needed. I rarely have had a chance to use that. So when I click OK here and save the export steps and save export, if I go ahead and look at my examples folder, I should have an Excel called Table Departments. And lo and behold, I do, and there's the data. And the same is true with any one of these items. If you export to Access, you have to identify the Access database that you want to put it into. If you want to send it to email, you could send it to email. You could send it to Word mail merge. You can do a lot of different things. Your most common are going to be to Excel or to a text file like .csv. Sometimes you'll create an XML file so that you can use it in a website. Making a PDF out of it sometimes is a good way to share data, especially if you're going to throw the data up on a website and you don't want it modified and you don't want people doing anything but using it as a PDF. You can do it that way. So that's a tour of importing and exporting. Hope you've enjoyed this. Please subscribe to the channel and we'll let you know when the next video comes out. See you then.